as somebody working in like the anti-racist space and facilitating the conversations you have, like what room do you think at all is there to, beyond even just this conversation, get folks aware of the issue of community violence, particularly how it intersects with race in the ways we've talked about today? Like, what other opportunities do you think exist to do that? Because again, it's one of those issues that, like, again, unless you live in these low to moderate income communities, which are disproportionately Black communities to a lesser extent, are some of our mixed communities that I come from, I noticed that most people don't talk about this issue like at all. And given how it's again one of the biggest, if not the biggest racial disparity, period, in our outcomes, that's a problem. And so I wanted to like ask you, like, yeah, like, from your expertise doing these kind of conversations facilitation, what else can we do to like get people aware of this problem and contextualizing it in the appropriate way, which is important, and then actually doing something about it. So that's what it's a big question, but I wanted to ask you, given your expertise.
I think that you hit the nail on the head in terms of the contextualization on two fronts. One, because it often isn't contextualized in the right way, right? I joked on social media when I was promoting this conversation that I was going to talk to the racialized white man about black on black crime. And, black on black crime is used as a cudgel to reinforce racial stereotypes of black people. And so that is traditionally the entirety of the conversation outside of, I would say, insular black spaces where we actually do talk about it,
Yeah.
even outside of, lower income class levels. Um, and as you mentioned, a lot of the people you're working with are people from the community, people who got involved. So, like, I feel like I think actually there's a lot of inroads that can be made to create the conversation just from what's already there. It's just about, again, the same thing we were talking about earlier, the will, right, to do something like that. And also the funding to like get something like that to happen consistently. That's what's always missing typically is like there isn't um, because when you start out doing these things, and you even mentioned it, a lot of the partners that you have now, they were underfunded. They didn't have a lot of resources, and they were probably struggling trying to do the work that they were doing. And so I think it just takes the right person, maybe, or people, or organizations, or something to reach out to these people who are doing the work. We already have everything we need, we already have everything we need to bring these conversations to bear. And I don't think that there are very many barriers to making it um, a more widespread conversation, except for the fact that it's just our environment, and
Yeah.
it's not what it's also not really what the government wants, overall. I feel like like, even though there's a lot of lip service, to it, and you're being funded, I'm not, like, this is happening,
Yeah.
and that's great, but like, um I don't think that not having people having a more peaceful society, I don't think it's necessarily the goal of our government. It may be like a happy consequence that they're willing to accept. And there are certain aspects of government that I think are targeting it. But I think overall, this country is very willing to accept violence and death. I would say that is being very generous in describing it. And some of the statistics that you gave us early on in the conversation, I think, justify that viewpoint. But you know, so I think under a country that kind of has that culture, Second Amendment culture, guns, our senators are posing with guns, like, I mean, I think it's just difficult to get people to come to the table. It's difficult to get people to fund it. It's difficult to get it organized because people are fearful, right, of retaliation. It's the same thing
Yeah.
of when I was trying to find venues for doing the Contraband Wagon work, right? To talk about anti-racism. A lot of the racialized white clergymen were like scared to host these events because they were like, okay, well, we're going to lose our parishioners if we start talking about anti-racism, and then we won't have a church. So we have to continue on, kind of like, playing the game, as it were. And so I think that kind of dynamic is the biggest barrier, is how to overcome that, how to get people to realize, no, we're not talking about taking your guns. We're not talking about, anything like that. We're talking about preventing the loss, this continuous concentrated loss of human life in these historically disenfranchised communities.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's all about context, right? You said it. Oftentimes, we don't contextualize stuff in a way that is accessible for people, or that people are able to accept more easily, in a difficult subject and context. So that's kind of like my holistic thoughts on that. In terms of like the nitty gritty and the specifics, you would know more about it. You've done a lot of this work already, in your own local community. For me, I've struggled greatly in creating collaborative partnerships, both individually and with organizations.
Mm.
And racism definitely played a role. Like, there is zero
Yeah.
question. And so basically, I'm kind of like, I don't know. I feel like I'm lone wolfing it at this point. I don't really think about doing that kind of thing anymore. I'm mostly just like, I'm gonna do whatever I want, and then like someone will definitely try to stop me because it happens every single time, and then I'll
Yeah.
just deal with it that way. And I think I can be more effective that way. But like, you know, just to go circle back to your initial question about like, how do you spread the conversation? We need you to get on these mainstream media shows and give the context that's missing from people who maybe are wanting to support action against this problem, but they don't know how, right? Or when somebody in the chat while we were talking said, why isn't this information readily available to the public? It's not. Like they
Yeah.
don't. Part of the reason the conversation doesn't happen is the same reason part of the conversation on race doesn't happen. There's no space for it, and we don't create space for it. And our culture isn't built to have space for it. So we have to forcefully create it. You and your community partners in the work that you were doing, maybe that wasn't your intention, was create that space necessarily. It was like more targeted and more specific and more tangible and material. But as a result of doing that work, you did create it. And then the partnership will just strengthen it. And so ultimately, it may be a chicken and egg type thing where
Yeah.
you need to act first and then build the community around those actions and then spread the conversation from that nexus point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I appreciate that perspective. And as always, Will, because you're good at what you do and you're a smart dude.